Growing up, my mother often shared tales of my grandfather, who began his life with little and built a thriving business. Despite his success, we never benefited financially from his endeavors, a reality I didn't grasp until much later. It all came down to the complexities surrounding his will. One cold evening, as we sat at our humble kitchen table sipping tepid tea, the heater had broken down again, and our landlord was in no hurry to fix it. My mother recounted, "Helen, your grandpa was a stubborn man. He believed strongly in the value of self-made success, which was why he tailored his will in such an exacting manner. His will dictated that his wealth would only pass to someone who had independently amassed at least $500,000 through their business ventures." "Why did he exclude us, Mom? Didn't he trust you to manage his wealth?" I asked, struggling to mask the resentment in my voice. With a sigh, my mom stared at the steam wafting from her cup. It wasn't about my ability to manage his money. He had this peculiar belief. To him, proving one's worth meant building something substantial on their own. I muttered under my breath about the cruelty of his game, a man who cherished his wealth more than his family. It was his way or the highway, my mom continued. The moment I challenged him, he practically disowned me, insisting that if I was capable, I'd make my fortune without his help. The injustice gnawed at me. Here we were, scrimping and saving every penny, while elsewhere, someone enjoyed the life that could have been ours. From a young age, I'd always had an eye for opportunity. I ran a lemonade stand on the hot days at the local golf course, charming the golfers with my youthful zeal as I sold cups for 90 cents. "You sure know how to hustle," an old golfer named Justin once complimented me, smiling as he handed me some change. "Keep that up and you'll be a tycoon someday." I was always dreaming of the next big thing, whether it was selling homemade bracelets and baubles I crafted from dollar store beads at various events or trading items during yard sales. It wasn't merely fun, it felt like my calling. My mother would often boast lightly to her friends, "Helen's got her little business empire going," her voice tinged with pride, which made me stand taller. But it was sewing that truly captured my passion. After purchasing an old sewing machine from a garage sale, a moment I considered a personal Christmas, teaching myself to sew became my new challenge. Despite the machine's quirks and the often spotty internet hindering online tutorials, I persevered. One day, as I adjusted my locker, Alice sneered, noticing something different about my attire. "Is that the same shirt you wore last week, Helen? Looks different." Casually replying as I slammed my locker shut, I suggested, "Yep, gave it a little makeover. You should try it sometime. Might improve your attitude." Through these endeavors, I felt a connection to my grandfather's ethos of self-reliance, albeit with a gentler spirit, hoping to one day bridge the legacy he envisioned with the family he left behind. As a couple of girls lingered near my locker, one approached with a shy smile. "That was really cool what you did with your shirt. Could you do mine?" she asked. Thrilled by her interest, I nodded enthusiastically. "Sure thing, bring it tomorrow," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. Word of my creative flair spread quickly and soon. I was flooded with custom orders. What started as a way to earn a little extra cash was blossoming into a legitimate business. I was delighted to offer something unique, and people were willing to pay well for it. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take my creations to the local street fair. I set up a rickety table, laid out my garments, and waited, my heart pounding with excitement. My friend Willie watched the crowd with skepticism. "You think people will buy these?" he asked doubtfully. "They'd be crazy not to," I responded, my confidence surging. And buy they did. My table was a hit, swarmed by eager customers. In the bustling crowd, a guy approached, his car keys jangling. "Hey, my car broke down a block from here. Saw your stall? This stuff yours?" he asked, gesturing toward my display. "Yeah, all made by me. Need something to pass the time while waiting for a tow?" I joked, handing him a shirt. He laughed heartily. "Actually, I was wondering if you do men's stuff too?" "Sure do. I replied, showing him some pieces I'd experimented with. He examined them thoughtfully, then looked at me with a spark of interest. "You've got talent. Ever think of making this a real business?" "Every day," I said without hesitation. "I'm Vincent, by the way," he introduced himself. "Helen," I replied, shaking his hand, feeling a pivotal moment unfold. As the day wound down and I counted the cash, a wave of fulfillment washed over me. "Told you they'd love your stuff," Willie remarked as we packed up. "You were right," I admitted, unable to hide my grin. It seemed I might just reach that $500,000 mark after all. After meeting Vincent at the fair, things accelerated faster than I could have anticipated. Unlike other guys I knew, Vincent came from money but had a way of making you forget it. He was relaxed, always laughing, always planning. Our casual meetings soon turned into serious dating. One day he suggested, "Helen, I think it's time you met my parents." The very thought made my stomach churn, knowing his family's old money background might make them look down on someone like me. "Are you sure?" I asked, anxiety tightening my voice. Vincent just laughed it off. "They'll love you, don't worry." The drive to Vincent's parents' house felt like the longest of my life. He chatted about everyday things, probably trying to ease my nerves, but my stomach twisted tighter with each mile. We turned into a long driveway, and there stood a massive house, more museum than home. As we approached the grand entrance, the door swung open. Vincent's mother, Mrs. Olivia, stood there impeccably dressed, making me feel suddenly underdressed despite my careful outfit choice. "Vincent, darling!" she exclaimed, embracing him warmly. Then, turning to me with a polite smile that barely masked her scrutiny, she said, "And you must be Helen. We've heard so much about you." Her words were warm, but her tone carried a chill that set the stage for an unforgettable meeting. I managed a smile as I greeted Vincent's mother. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Olivia," I said, trying to hide my nervousness. Vincent led me inside their expansive home, where Mr. Joseph soon appeared. He was tall and had a stern demeanor, with a handshake that seemed more like an evaluation than a greeting. "Helen, a pleasure," he stated, his voice deep and devoid of warmth. We moved into their living room, which was as grand and unwelcoming as a museum hall, where everything felt overly stiff and formal. They engaged in small talk while I mostly nodded and smiled, feeling completely out of place. Dinner was served in a dining room that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine, complete with crystal and fine china that seemed too precious to use. As we sat down to eat, Mr. Joseph began what felt like an interrogation. "So, Helen, Vincent tells us you're into fashion design?" he said, scrutinizing me as if I were a puzzle he needed to solve. "Yes, I run a small business designing and selling clothes," I replied, my voice steady despite the tension. Self-made then. How entrepreneurial," he remarked dryly, making it sound less like a compliment and more like a mere curiosity. Mrs. Olivia then joined in, her smile tight. "And your family, dear? What do they do?" "It's just me and my mom. She's a nurse," I answered, feeling the weight of each word. "Oh, I see," Mrs. Olivia responded, exchanging a meaningful look with her husband that I couldn't quite decipher. The conversation limped along until coffee was served, and then Mrs. Olivia's polite facade finally slipped. "Helen, I must be honest, we have certain expectations for Vincent, and his partner's background is important for maintaining the family's reputation and legacy," she declared, her tone chilling. She then set her fork down and continued bluntly, "Well, it's clear you've achieved quite a bit despite your background, but I don't think you're suitable for our son. I'm afraid," she concluded, her words striking like a cold slap. Stunned, I could only sit there as she rose from the table and left the room without another word. Vincent quickly tried to console me, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Helen, please don't take it to heart. She's just set in her ways," he attempted to reassure me. But the damage was done, and the evening had turned into a harsh revelation of where I stood with his family. Despite the frosty encounter, Vincent proposed that night. We became engaged, and while I was thrilled about us, the cool disdain from his parents was hard to ignore. A few weeks later, Mrs. Olivia called me, her voice as formal as ever. "Helen, I'd like you to come over. We need to discuss something important." When I arrived, both of Vincent's parents were waiting in their cold, unwelcoming home. Without any pleasantries, Mrs. Olivia began, her tone sharp and hostile. "Helen, we've investigated your background thoroughly," she said. Mr. Joseph nodded, his expression stern. "It's clear you come from a very different world than ours," his wife added. "And frankly, we feel you're seeking wealth by climbing through our son. But we won't allow our family fortune to be jeopardized," she stated unequivocally. Her words stung deeply, reinforcing the stark divide between our worlds. Before I could react, Mrs. Olivia pushed a stack of papers across the table toward me. "Since I can't convince Vincent to rethink this marriage, you'll need to sign these," she stated flatly. I picked up the documents, a prenuptial agreement. Reading through, it was clear I wouldn't have any claim to Vincent's wealth, nor would any children we might have. Without hesitation, I signed them. "I'm not marrying Vincent for his money," I declared, sliding the signed papers back to her. Mrs. Olivia's expression shifted to surprise, her eyes widening. Even Mr. Joseph raised an eyebrow, taken aback by my swift compliance. Leaving their house, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. At home, I recounted the entire exchange to Vincent. He laughed it off. "Wow, you really showed them. Good for you." But his laughter felt hollow. "Aren't you bothered that your mom thinks so lowly of me? She humiliated me, Vincent." He shrugged, still smiling. "I get why you're upset, but you know how Mom is. She has her reasons and, well, she's not completely wrong to worry, right?" His words felt like a betrayal. Not only had his mother insulted me, but now Vincent was subtly defending her. It hurt to realize that perhaps he wasn't entirely on my side. A year after our engagement, as the wedding drew closer, my life was a whirlwind of excitement and stress. My business, a sportswear brand I had started from scratch, was finally taking off. It was thrilling to see my designs being worn and loved. I had built enough capital to expand and take on bigger challenges. As for the wedding, I wanted something simple and intimate, but Vincent dreamed of a lavish celebration. "Helen, we're only doing this once. Let's make it big," he'd say with a grin that made it hard to argue. So, I agreed, and we planned a grand event. I found myself sharing the costs for a grand venue, exquisite catering, and a band that kept our guests dancing all night. I managed to snag some deals, haggling discounts wherever I could. Old habits die hard. The wedding day was perfect, at least on the surface. Our guests seemed to have the time of their lives, and Vincent and I couldn't stop smiling. We were floating, caught up in a bubble of joy. However, not everyone was caught up in the festivity. Throughout the evening, I noticed Vincent's parents whispering, their faces pinched with disapproval. His mother, ever the social butterfly, floated around the room, subtly dropping hints about her worries that I was after their family wealth. I overheard her telling a group of relatives, "It's all very extravagant, isn't it? I just hope she understands the value of money, not just spending it." Her words carried across the room and stung more than I had expected. After the wedding, things didn't settle down. Vincent's mom took to social media, lamenting that Vincent had married someone like me. She wrote about her fear of losing her son to a woman who, in her eyes, wasn't worthy. Reading those words hurt. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes burn, not just with sadness, but with frustration. I tried to talk to Vincent about it. "Your mom's posts are harsh. Can you talk to them? They don't even know how well the business is doing." Vincent sighed, his face troubled. "Helen, I know it's tough, but let's not rock the boat, okay? My parents, it's just how they are. But they think I'm some gold digger, Vincent. They don't see that I don't need their money," I protested. He pulled me close, his voice soothing. "I know," he whispered. But I just nodded, not convinced yet exhausted from the argument. I agreed to let it go, not because I thought Vincent was right, but because I was too tired to keep fighting. It was easier to focus on my business, pouring my energy into something positive, something that was truly mine. Despite the personal turmoil, my business kept growing. Orders poured in and my brand gained a following. I was busy with interviews, photo shoots, and even discussing partnerships. My days were packed and I thrived on the hustle. The evening of the charity dinner arrived, held at a swanky downtown hotel. The event supported sports programs for kids and teenagers, and as the main costume designer, I had chosen a blue and white theme to match not just the decor, but some of the latest pieces from my sportswear line. Vincent and I walked into the grand hall, which buzzed with well-dressed guests and shimmering lights. I was nervous but excited to see my designs showcased in such a grand setting. That excitement quickly soured when I spotted Vincent's parents across the room. Their cold stares cut right through the warmth of the bustling crowd. Vincent noticed but said nothing, and their blatant disregard stung me deeply. I bit my lip and kept walking. As guests arrived, I circulated the room, chatting and networking. Vincent was by my side, his usual charming self, though I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the event. "You're really pulling out all the stops, huh?" Vincent commented as we watched the crowd from a distance. "Go big or go home, right?" I replied with a wink. "Helen, you've outdone yourself," a familiar voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a local sports celebrity who'd worn my designs before. "These uniforms are fantastic. Thanks so much." "Enjoy the evening," I smiled, handing them a business card. "Let's catch up soon." The event was buzzing, the atmosphere electric with enthusiasm and goodwill. Then the moment of truth arrived. The host took to the stage to thank the sponsors, and my heart raced as he started to speak. We hadn't been seated long when the evening's presenter took the stage to kick off the event. The atmosphere was lively, filled with applause and cheer until it came time to thank the sponsors. My heart raced with pride and anxiety as my name was announced as one of the main contributors. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Helen, whose generous donation of over $410,000 made tonight possible. The presenter boomed through the microphone. The room erupted in applause, but it was abruptly pierced by a shriek from Mrs. Olivia, Vincent's mother. "Absolutely not," she screamed, drawing the room into a shocked silence. She demanded a microphone, and once it was handed to her, she didn't hesitate. "This is preposterous. Helen couldn't possibly afford this. She's nothing but a poor beggar using my son's money. She's a cunning predator sneaking into our family to bankrupt us." Her words echoed through the hall, venomous and loud. The presenter, taken aback but composed, quickly tried to correct the situation. "Mrs. Olivia, I assure you are mistaken. Helen's company is extremely successful and fully capable of such generosity. I know this firsthand." The crowd murmured, the tension palpable. Then, in an unexpected move, the presenter passed the microphone to Vincent, hoping for him to clear the air. Vincent's face was a mix of embarrassment and conflict. He glanced at his parents, then at me, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the microphone. "I have nothing to say." And with that, he walked over to his parents, leaving me standing alone amidst a sea of whispers. The weight of the moment settled heavily on my shoulders. I felt exposed and humiliated, not just by the accusations, but by Vincent's failure to defend me. But it was Vincent's refusal to defend me, to affirm the truth about my success, that tarnished the pride I had felt in my contribution. It was overshadowed by the unfolding drama. Determined to reclaim my narrative, I stepped toward the microphone, my heart pounding but my resolve clear. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions swirling inside me. "Tonight, I'd like to share something very personal about my journey." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I continued. "I started as a street entrepreneur, driven not just by the need to make ends meet, but by a dream. That dream led to the creation of a sportswear brand that many of you know now." I paused, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of young athletes and seasoned businessmen alike. When my company's profits hit $500,000, I fulfilled a promise to a very special person, my grandfather. My voice grew stronger as I spoke. He left a will stating that his inheritance would go to a relative who made their success, reaching that exact figure in their business. Whispers filled the hall as I let that sink in. That inheritance has been used to fuel not just my personal growth, but to give back through charity, much like tonight's event. The crowd listened, some nodding as I unfolded more of my story. After the pandemic, my business didn't just survive. It thrived, growing several times over. Every challenge I faced was a stepping stone. As I stand before you, I am not just a business owner, but someone who believes in the power of perseverance and dedication. The room erupted into applause, some guests standing in ovation. I scanned the crowd, seeing faces light up with respect and admiration. But my eyes briefly caught Vincent's parents. Their expressions, once haughty, now showed disbelief and embarrassment. They quietly exited the hotel. Vincent, looking equally shaken, tried to approach me, muttering an apology. "Helen!" I just shook my head and walked past him, my emotions a mix of triumph and heartache. I needed space, not just from the evening's drama, but from everything. I decided to stay at the hotel that night, alone with my thoughts. Later, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Honey, I saw everything. I just want you to know how proud I am to see you stand up there, telling your story and reclaiming your truth. You're everything I hoped you'd be." After spending a night at the hotel to clear my head, I returned home. The place felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension from the last few months. Vincent was there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he tried to apologize again. "Helen, I'm so sorry about everything. Can we just forget all this and start over?" he pleaded, his voice desperate. I shook my head, the decision heavy on my heart but clear in my mind. "Vincent, I can't. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who sides with his parents over his wife. It's not just about last night. This has been building for a long time." His face fell, mirroring the sadness of our unraveling. As Vincent reached out, I instinctively stepped back. "I'm filing for divorce," I said firmly. Without waiting for his response, I gathered a few essentials and left for my mother's house, the one I recently bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. It felt like a sanctuary after the storm. The divorce proceedings were straightforward thanks to the prenuptial agreement we had signed. With no children to consider, the process was over quickly. During that time, Vincent's parents tried to intervene. They called repeatedly, not out of concern for me, but in an attempt to patch up their son's unraveling life now that I was no longer in the picture. I blocked their numbers, not just to silence the constant ringing, but to cut ties with a past that was holding me back. Through friends, I heard Vincent started to unravel. He began drinking, lost his job, and eventually his parents disowned him, unwilling to let his downward spiral tarnish their reputation. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sorrow for him. I never wished him harm, but I knew I needed to focus on moving forward. Living at my mother's place provided the peace I needed to contemplate my next steps. My business was still thriving, and I poured more of myself into it, not just as a distraction from the divorce, but to rebuild stronger foundations for my future. One evening, sitting in the garden that my mom and I had cultivated together, she turned to me with a soft smile. "You did the right thing, Helen. It's tough, but you're tougher, and I'm here always." "Thanks, Mom. I know. It's just a lot to process," I replied, feeling the weight of her support. "As long as you remember that you're not just surviving, you're building, learning, and growing. That's what matters," she said, squeezing my hand. She was right. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was the gateway to a new chapter, one where I could make decisions without second-guessing whether someone had my back. It was a new beginning where I could stand on my own, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a person reshaped by her experiences. Each step forward was now shaped by self-assurance and an enduring resolve to live life on my terms, strengthened by the trials I had overcome.